Hey everyone, we're going to continue to read Christmas in Camelot. We are currently going to start chapter 3. So what's happening so far is Jack and Annie are now entering the castle with Morgan to go see the king. So let's find out. Chapter 3 is the Knights of the Round Table. A pair of torches dimly lit the drafty entrance of the hall of the castle. Shadows danced on the worn tapestries. "Wait here," said Morgan. "I will tell the king of your arrival." She headed through the huge stone archway that led to the great hall. "Let's peek in," Annie said to Jack. Jack pushed his glasses back into place, and he and Annie walked quietly over to the big arch and peered in. The ceiling of the great hall towered high above the stone floor. At the far end of the room, King Arthur and his knights were sitting around the huge table. They all wore brown tunics. They had shaggy hair and beards. Their names were carved in gold letters on the backs of their chairs. "The kings of the Round Table," whispered Jack. Here's the picture. Morgan was talking to King Arthur. Beside the king sat a woman in a plain gray robe. She had pale skin and brown curly hair. "Queen Guinevere," whispered Annie. Morgan left the king, and Jack and Annie moved quickly back into the shadows. A moment later, Morgan appeared. "I told the king that two special friends of his just arrived." She said, "Come with me." As they walked with Morgan through the great hall, Jack shivered. The huge room was drafty and damp. There was no fire in the fireplace. The stone floor was so cold that Jack could feel the chill through his sneakers. They stopped near the round table. King Arthur stared at them with piercing gray eyes. "Greetings from Frog Creek," Annie said to the king and queen. Annie bowed, and Jack bowed too. The queen smiled, but King Arthur did not. "Your Majesty, you remember Jack and Annie," said Morgan. "You met them last summer in my library." "Indeed, I shall never forget them," King Arthur said. "Greetings, Annie. Greetings, Jack. How do you come to be in Camelot on this bleak night?" "We came in the magic treehouse," said Annie. The shadow crossed the king's face. He looked at Morgan. "No, your Majesty, I did not use magic to bring them here," she said. "Perhaps a little bit of magic still lingers in the treehouse, and it travels on its own." "What's going on?" Jack wondered. "Why does King Arthur seem unhappy about the magic treehouse?" King Arthur looked back at Jack and Annie. "However you've come, you are welcome in my kingdom," he said. He turned to his queen. "Guinevere, these two are my friends, who once gave me hope and courage in a time of need." Queen Guinevere smiled again, but there was a sad look in her eyes. "I have heard much about you," she said. "I've heard about you too," said Annie. "Allow me to present my knights," said the king. As the king named each knight, Jack and Annie nodded shyly. The knights nodded at them in return. Jack waited to hear one name: Sir Lancelot, the most famous of Camelot's knights. But the king never said it. "And finally, my last two knights," King Arthur said. But it wasn't Sir Lancelot either. The king then turned to three empty chairs at the table. There once sat three who were lost to us now. "Lost how?" Jack wondered. "You may sit in their places and join our dinner," King Arthur said. "Thank you," said Annie. Following Morgan around the table, Jack read the names carved into the back of the chairs. Jack took off his backpack and sat down in Sir Lancelot's place. As he sat tall and straight in the heavy wooden chair, Jack looked at the king and his knights. They were all gnawing meat off of bones and slurping wine from heavy goblets. They ate without manners or delight. Jack really wanted to take notes. He reached into his backpack under the table and pulled out his notebook and pencil. But before he could write a word, a serving boy brought more food. Jack quickly put his things away. The boy set the greasy slab of beef and a soggy piece of bread in front of him. The food looked terrible. "Not much of a Christmas feast, huh?" Annie said in a low voice. Jack shook his head. Annie leaned close to Morgan and whispered, so King Arthur wouldn't hear. "What happened to the 3 lost knights?" she asked. After the dark wizard cast his spell, the king sought help from the help of Camelot. Morgan said quietly, "They told him he must send his knights on a quest to the other world to recapture our kingdom's joy." "What's the other world?" said Jack. "It's an ancient, enchanted land beyond the edge of earth," said Morgan, "the place where all magic first began." "Wow," whispered Annie. "The king chose his 3 bravest knights to journey there," said Morgan. "When they did not come back, Arthur turned against. He blamed magic for all of Camelot's woes. Hence, he banned magic of any kind from the kingdom forever." "Did the knight turn against you too?" "Arthur and I are long friends," said Morgan. "He has allowed me to stay in the castle as long as I promise not to practice the art of magic ever again." A feeling of dread crept over Jack. "So does that mean the magic treehouse is—" Morgan nodded. "Yes. Banished from Camelot," she said. "I'm afraid this will be your last journey, and the last time we see each other." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away. "What? The last time we see each other? Forever?" said Annie. Before Morgan could answer, the wooden door swung open with a bang. The wind rushed through the great hall. The torches and candles flamed brighter, making the shadows leap wildly on the walls. The sound of hoofbeats filled the room, and a knight on a huge horse rode through the arched doorway. The knight was dressed in red, from his shining helmet to the long cloak on his back. His horse was dressed in all green, from his armor that covered his head to the cloth that hung from his saddle. "Oh, wow," breathed Annie. "A Christmas night." That was chapter 3. Next is chapter 4. So I'll see you then. Bye.